My name is H.A. Goodman and I'm an author, columnist, and journalist. Do you want this type of person anywhere near the White House? I understand the skepticism so many feel about Iran. I too am deeply concerned about Iranian aggression and the need to confront it. It's a ruthless, brutal regime that has the blood of Americans, many others including its own people, on its hands. Its political rallies resound with cries of death to America. Would you want this type of person in the White House? Do you want to know who this war hawk is?
Let me start by saying I understand the skepticism so many feel about Iran. I too am deeply concerned about Iranian aggression and the need to confront it. It's a ruthless, brutal regime that has the blood of Americans, many others, including its own people, on its hands. Its political rallies resound with cries of death to America.
All right. So the hawkish neocon you just heard wasn't Bolton, wasn't John Bolton, it was Hillary Clinton. That being said, John Bolton is a horrible pick for National Security Advisor. You can't make America great again if we're all glowing from a nuclear fallout. I think there's two things here. One, thank God President Trump doesn't listen to his advisors or his national security advisor, at least. I don't think HR McMaster went ahead and said, President Trump, Mr. President, you should go ahead and tweet Kim Jong-un and say, I don't know why you're talking about my age, but I don't make fun of you because you're short and fat. I think that was one of the tweets, not obviously in that way it was written in a tweet. I don't think HR McMaster said, hey, you should go ahead and call Kim Jong-un Rocket Man. So those things didn't happen. I think that a lot of this, President Trump needed to pick an establishment national security advisor. General Flynn was against the regime, the neoconservative regime changes. Peter Strzok interviewed him. Peter Strzok was part of the Clinton email cover-up and hated Trump at the FBI, the number 2 counterintelligence officer. We know about his text messages regarding an insurance policy, which is Russia, with Lisa Page. But I don't know how much he listened to H.R. McMaster. I think a lot of what's taking place, especially with North Korea, involves Trump's relationship with China, which is a good relationship. And I think that China has been working overtime to enable Trump to meet with North Korea. That's just the way I see. That's one of the things I don't think many people are talking about. Because the most important ally North Korea, one of the only allies North Korea has, is China, and they're not really. It's one of the most important. The most important country in the world to North Korea is China. So I do think that China played a big role in Trump meeting Kim Jong-un. That being said, I don't think it was H.R. McMaster and a more traditional, as a traditional national security advisor, who advised Trump to be belligerent on Twitter, which inevitably worked out because he's meeting, or at least had a positive impact in some manner, because he's meeting with Kim Jong-un. If the meeting goes well, he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. I explained that in a segment. If Obama or Clinton met Kim Jong-un and there was some kind of détente with North Korea, they too would have received a Nobel Peace Prize. Obama received a Nobel Peace Prize for doing nothing and then becoming very, very hawkish afterwards, destroying Libya, etc. But number one, I don't think it's for advice. John Bolton has been wrong about a great many things. The Iraq War being one of the biggest things he's been wrong on. Part of the Bush administration still thinks that the Iraq War was a good thing. That is not... You don't want anyone with that mindset near a president or in the White House. Just like you wouldn't want Clinton, you sure as heck don't want John Bolton. It's a really, really bad, horrible pick if he ends up picking Bolton. But, number two, the reason he would want to pick Bolton is that his plan is his strategy is probably to always seem like the good cop in any type of deal. So he has Gina Haspel, who's like this torture freak, and then you have John Bolton, who, if you said, "Hey, I'll give you a Snickers if you press that nuclear button," like, okay, he would go ahead and press the nuclear button. Like, how, I don't know if you saw Crimson Tide, where it's like this huge standoff, like, go ahead, press the nuclear button. It's like, the guy doesn't really want to. He's trying to save the world, but the other guy's following orders. No, John Bolton, like, no problem. I'll do it for like a bag of Cheetos. It's fine. I'll press it. It's fun. It's good. So that you don't want a guy like John Bolton, and we can go, through his resume and things that he said. But this long-winded point number two, the second point, in addition to the fact that Trump, thank God, doesn't listen to his advisors, or at least many of them, or at least H.R. McMaster, he's rolling in to the North Korean meeting, possibly with a new national security advisor who is extremely hawkish, extremely hawkish, and very proud that he's hawkish, and a CIA chief who's known for torture, Gina Haspel. So that then makes him the good cop, or somebody that during a deal with North Korea or some kind of negotiation says, look, you know what, I have this advisor, I have a CIA chief, and they want to destroy the planet. So I don't want to destroy the planet. I have hotels everywhere. Why don't we make a deal? And then, in typical Trump fashion, but if we don't make a deal, you'll have to deal with Bolton and Haspel. That is one way of looking at things. That is one way of, because we're not going to attack Iran ever. We're not going to attack North Korea ever. North Korea already has nuclear weapons, and they would do everything possible to destroy South Korea. So we would never do that. And Iran is in between Iraq and Afghanistan. And Iran has influence with the Shia militias within Iraq. They could cause mayhem there, and they also have influence within Afghanistan. And they could cause mayhem there. Two theaters of war that we're currently entrenched within, and we don't even have this. We don't have the military. We don't have the money to have a third regime change. So this isn't like, poker, like a 3-of-a-kind regime change. Oh, you won. It's you don't want to go into Iraq, Afghanistan, and Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan. That would not be good for anybody, and we couldn't even do. We're too overstretched as it is. And then gas prices would be so high, we'd be all riding bikes to work. So it's not when people say, oh my God, Bolton's going to cause war with Iran, or he's going to cause war with North Korea. We're not going to engage in any wars with Iran or North Korea ever, unless they do something insane. Then we'll retaliate. But they're not going to do something insane. The whole rhetoric and the issue with Iran is that they do fund terror throughout the Middle East, or terrorist groups, and they do. They are very influential in terms of the Shia militias and Shia movements within Iraq. And there are other reasons, of course, why Iran and the United States are technically enemies or adversaries. But, and by the way, I love the Iranian people. I do. I love the Iranian people. So when I talk about Iran, I'm talking about just the government. I love the Korean people. And when I talk about North Korea or Kim Jong-un and how he's perhaps as crazy as John Bolton, I'm not talking about the people. John Bolton, Trump's rumored pick for National Security Advisor. Sources say McMaster is next replaced by Bolton. Trump is firing everyone who could stop war with Iran. Okay, so we're not going to have a war with Iran. That's not... The regime changes in Libya, Iraq, and Afghanistan did not work out. We're not going to go for another failed regime change. And Iran has a government that's far more stable than Libya, Iraq, or Afghanistan was before we engaged in regime change. Trump has decided to remove his national security advisor. Trump to dismiss McMaster. Okay. John Bolton, the ultrahawk, rumored to be Trump's next national security advisor. Okay. Let's just go ahead really quickly and listen to Bolton. Our goal should be regime change in Iran. So, John Bolton is... if Trump picks him, it's not because of his intellect. It's to present an image of uncertainty, craziness, aggression towards countries that need to either abide by a nuclear deal in terms of Iran, which was completely flawed, and I'll explain in a second. Apparently Obama's nuclear deal did not cover ballistic missile tests. So, but this is John Bolton.
We'll see. President Trump responding briefly Sunday to a chilling warning from North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, now claiming to have a nuclear button ready on his desk.
Here to react, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN and Fox News contributor John Bolton. Happy New Year to you, sir.
This is January 1st, 2018.
And I'm going to get the perfunctory question out of the way. One, is there a button? And two, does it matter if there is a button, or is our diplomacy policy going to be the exact same?
Well, look, it's propaganda from Kim Jong-un. This is his regular New Year's speech, and obviously he has seen the conversation in the United States that looks at possible preemptive military force, not as the most attractive option, but as an option that we definitely have to use if they don't give up their nuclear weapons program. So we need a very careful calibration exactly what the North's capabilities are. I think they've made incredible advances in the past year. They're very close to crossing the finish line, but they haven't done it yet. And if he has a nuclear button on his desk, maybe he could give us a copy of it too.
Ambassador Bolton, what do you make of Kim Jong-un's plans for 2018, though? Because in the same breath that he is reaching out to the South Korean government and saying that he wants things to cool off enough for North Korea to be able to send athletes to the Winter Olympics in a few weeks, that it's 50 miles from the border. A second later,
cross that finish line, perfect their target.
Peaceful demonstrators cannot communicate, not good. I want to ask you this question, Ambassador Bolton. Is there a way that we can use these protests to benefit our geopolitical stance in the world?
Absolutely. And I think it's important to understand these protests are very different from the post-election protest in 2009, where many people believe Mahmoud Ahmadinejad won re-election by fraud. The protests back then were over who was going to run the regime. These protests about whether the regime survives or not, and that makes them much more threatening to the Ayatollahs, much more dangerous, and raises the stakes considerably. I think President Trump has already signaled a huge difference from the Obama administration by supporting the protesters, but I think...
Okay, so it eventually says our goal should be regime change in Iran. I want to get to there's one, so he doesn't sound like a complete raving lunatic there, although Tucker Carlson had a funny exchange with him.
Bolton think is the greatest threat to America today. Ambassador Bolton joins us tonight. Great to see you, Ambassador. Glad to be here. So it feels like we're moving kind of in slow motion toward a conflict with Iran and Russia in Syria. Do you think we are?
Well, I think that's one possibility. I think the Iranians have clearly gamed what they plan to do after the defeat of the ISIS territorial caliphate.
Yes.
I think they were thinking of it when our strategists were not thinking of it, and we're now suffering the consequences with Iran literally on Israel's border, flying drones into Israeli airspace. I don't think that's the really most dangerous aspect of the Middle East, though. I still think it's Iran's support for terrorism and its continued effort to get deliverable nuclear weapons.
Right. So obviously Iran was greatly empowered by the fall of Saddam. I think in retrospect we can concede that. There haven't been any Iran-sponsored terror attacks in this country that I'm aware of in the last 25 years. There have, of course, been many, many, many sponsored by Saudi Arabians and the Gulf states and the Sunni Arab world. So why should we see Iran as our primary threat?
Because Iran, for many decades, has been the world's central banker of international terrorism, funding Shia, Sunni terrorists on an equal opportunity basis, providing arms to them as they do to Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So it's their support for terrorism generally that should concern us, not necessarily specific attacks in the United States.
But in order to commit American troops and the billions it takes to prosecute any kind of conflict, wouldn't you want to go after the people who are attacking us here first?
Yeah. Well, nobody's talking about committing massive amounts of troops. What we have to worry about, I think, most importantly, is the threat of North Korea's nuclear weapons program.
Okay, so then it goes on to where they go back and forth. You can see that he's very hawkish. I'm actually giving you snippets of John Bolton that, while very hawkish, he's not stating we have to go ahead and attack. Well, he did in the first clip attack North Korea, but there's an interesting back and forth, and there's a method to the madness. So if you just listen here, I'll explain a little something pertaining to the 2 points I made in the beginning of this segment.
Coalition Provisional Authority and others that followed from it are lessons about what to do after a regime is overthrown. But I'd also point out, because of President Bush's surge policy, when his administration ended, stability had returned to Iraq. It was not a place you'd go for vacation.
That's not true at all. That's not true at all. It was not stable. During the later years of Bush administration, you could look at, I think it's Iraq body count. There's a couple sites, and it talks about all the suicide bombings and all the chaos and mayhem, even up until 2009. Not saying that the Obama experience in Iraq was fantastic. I'm just saying that throughout Bush, even the last couple of years, there was still a lot of chaos. It perhaps subsided from 2006 or 2005, but there was still a tremendous amount of chaos.
Right. But he turned it over to Barack Obama, and it fell apart subsequently. And the point I think you need to understand is that life is complicated in the Middle East. And when you say, well, the overthrow of Saddam Hussein was a mistake, is simplistic.
I would argue that I'm the one who understands how complicated it is, but just my view.
It's your long experience in foreign policy.
Better record than yours, I would say. But thank you, Ambassador. Good to see you.
So he just dissed John Bolton, and rightfully so. What can I tell you? John Bolton is not a good choice. Tucker Carlson obviously doesn't think that he has a good record in foreign policy, and I'll leave that link below. the clips are not exactly the clips that I probably should have found something a little bit more hawkish in terms of his value system, but you got a chance to hear who he is. You can tell nonetheless that he is, well, the first clip with North Korea, yeah, he did say if we have to attack them, something to that effect. Then the second clip, he talked about, well, you know, it wasn't the fall of Saddam that emboldened Iran. Actually, it was. We had a policy of dual containment. And we will never, ever attack Iran unless they attack somebody, because they could retaliate by closing the Straits of Hormuz, which would spike the price of oil to the point of instant recession / depression throughout the global recession throughout the world. So, and then I explained also, there's no, just look at the map. Iran is located in between Iraq and Afghanistan, and it also shares a border with Pakistan. So we wouldn't go ahead and attack Iran ever. We don't even have, it wouldn't help our foreign policy. It wouldn't help our national security. And that's why we're in Syria. Syria is a proxy war, just like Vietnam was, just like Afghanistan was for the Soviets. We're fighting Iran and Russia in Syria, which is a neoconservative, part of conservative ideology. Syria, there's no national interest that we have to be in Syria. The issue here with Bolton, if he becomes the national security advisor, is that he's extremely, extremely hawkish. He has no problem looking at the bright side of war and the bright side of conflict, or he has no problem saying, yeah, Mr. President, we should go in and attack, or going on shows and saying, yeah, we should go ahead and attack Iran or attack North Korea, while Trump is negotiating with them. But this is really interesting. This is October 4th, 2016. Collapse over Iran's missiles. Has the U.S. just been pretending it's serious about restraining Iran's missile program? The revelation of recent days that back in January, President Obama agreed that the United Nations should lift its sanctions against 2 Iranian state banks, which financed Iran's ballistic missile development, put the lie to Washington's claim, stubbornly maintained for more than a year, that it was determined to rein in the Islamic Republic's expanding missile program. This is usnews.com. This is U.S. News and World Report from Lawrence J. Haas. Okay. In fact, the president's decision reflects a larger pattern of U.S. backtracking over Iran's ballistic missiles, one that dates back to well before the landmark U.S.-led global agreement with Iran over its nuclear program in July 2015. With an agreement over Iran's nuclear program in place, U.S. officials argued they could then pressure Iran over not only its ballistic missile program, but also its sponsorship of terror. Its effort to destabilize Sunni nations in the region, which, by the way, Saudi Arabia and Israel have shared common goals, and they've united in a covert manner against Iran. So, politics makes strange bedfellows. With an agreement over Iran's nuclear program in place, U.S. officials argued they could then pressure Iran over not only its ballistic missile program, but also its sponsorship of terror, its efforts to destabilize Sunni nations in the region, and its increasingly grotesque human rights record at home. So this, obviously, the author is not happy with the Iran deal, rightfully so. Why? Because it doesn't... President Obama's landmark nuclear deal with Iran happened to just miss something that nobody's talking about. They can still test ballistic missiles. They can still engage in missile tests. So when North Korea engaged in missile tests, it was, this huge thing. But Iran can still... Okay, so this is another article I'll read you. Obama administration, Iranian ballistic missile tests not a nuke deal violation. Iran is permitted to test fire ballistic missiles under the parameters of the recently linked nuclear accord, according to private disclosures made by Secretary of State John Kerry to a leading U.S. senator. So, Iran is permitted to test fire ballistic missiles under the Iran deal, the amazing Iran deal from Obama and Clinton. Really? Is that what's going on now? The Obama administration's failure to rein in Iran's ballistic missile program has emerged as a key criticism. Gee, you think? Iran's October missile test violated UN ban. Okay. And even this wasn't enough for President Obama to continue sanctions on Iranian banks. They just test ballistic missiles, and Obama's administration was okay with it. Yet they championed the nuclear deal. Well, okay, you don't even know if they're abiding by the nuclear deal, but you sure as heck know that they're not abiding by the missile tests that would carry the nukes. So what's the point of having a nuclear deal if they're going ahead and testing ballistic missiles? Does that make any sense at all? It obviously makes no sense. That's stupid. Diplomats say the rocket test on October 10th, this is on December 2015. Diplomats say the rocket test on October 10th was technically not a violation of the July nuclear deal between Iran and 6 world powers, but the UN report could put President Obama's administration in an awkward position. Yeah. The Security Council's panel of experts on Iran said in a confidential new report first reported by Reuters that the launch showed the rocket met its requirements for considering that a missile could deliver a nuclear weapon. Okay. Then he said Iran has said any new sanctions would jeopardize the nuclear deal if Washington failed to call for sanctions over the Imad launch. It would likely be perceived as weak. Okay, so that's one reason why Trump doesn't like the deal. I'll go ahead. Iran's October missile test violated UN ban. Expert panel. So they're going ahead and they are testing ballistic missiles. Okay, so you have crazy John Bolton on one end, and then you have Iran's like, yeah, we'll abide by it, I guess. We'll abide by the nuclear part, but not the ballistic missile part. You're going to have to work a little harder to encompass every possible way there won't be a nuclear confrontation in the future. Obama says Iranian missile test won't derail nuclear deal. So there you go. What a great deal. So the whole thing is, which one is it? Have they stopped their nuclear ambitions with President Obama's deal? I'll read you this. President vows to enforce current sanctions on missile program. Stop short of new sanctions. Okay. Iranian actions, such as ballistic missile tests conducted last week, won't derail the nuclear agreement with Tehran. Well, isn't that special? Iran's state news agency reported last weekend the government had test-fired a new long-range, surface-to-surface ballistic missile, a move the White House said may have violated the United Nations Security Council resolution, but not their own, apparently not their own nuclear deal. Which literally is the case. President Obama's administration apparently said that it violated that Iran's test firing of missiles violated a UN Security Council resolution, but apparently not the actual Iran deal. Give me your thoughts below. All of this is as disjointed as this segment. U.S. fear over Iran missile tests. It was Iran's first missile test since the international nuclear deal was struck in July. That's obviously a violation. It's obviously a violation of the nuclear deal. Even if they say it's not, the delivery system should not be tested. The whole point of the nuclear deal is that they don't continue their nuclear program. So then why is the delivery system of the nuke not part of the deal? Give me your thoughts below. Share this segment everywhere. You know, would John Bolton make things better? No, I don't think so. I don't think that he should be National Security Advisor. But he's obviously, if Trump picks him, a choice that is meant to frighten people. So, he's obviously a choice meant to frighten people. And thank God Trump doesn't listen to his advisors, or at least has his own strategy. You're not going to go ahead and engage. You're not going to have, one of Trump's signature achievements is the tax cuts, which is said to kick in full by 2020. A war with Iran is not going to help the economy. To the contrary, it'll destroy our economy and destroy global economies. So it's all rhetoric. It's all rhetoric. But still, you don't want to hear the rhetoric. So you don't want to hear John Bolton getting dissed by Tucker Carlson or saying, yeah, you know what, if Iran wants a war, we'll have a war with them. That's not what you want to hear. Give me your thoughts below. Share this segment everywhere. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. And thank you so much for listening. Give me your thoughts. What do you think about all of this? Thank you so much for listening.